creaky floors, and everyone else. You're listening to Creep It Real, and I'm Ashley.
And I'm Bianca.
Thank you for joining us.
Welcome back. Our shirts are out, and we have sent them out. So hopefully all of you beautiful patrons have received them. We hope that you love them. We got a couple Instagram messages saying, I got your shirt.
Woo woo! And now I think they're going to be available to buy for our non-patrons.
Yes. So I just have to, honestly, it's just about taking a picture of the shirt and putting it up on the website that is up, but not live.
Okay.
But anyways.
Soon you'll be able to get a shirt. We're Your Family Now shirt. And if you want one, just let us know.
Mm-hmm. This week, we're getting back into a subject that we both find unbearably fascinating. Ooh, fascinating, huh?
Mm-hmm.
That Minnesota is creeping up into me.
Creeping right up into you.
And it's a pretty well-known case that has been in the news and has had some documentaries and docuseries created about it. And we found out yesterday that HBO is doing a docuseries about it. So you'll be able to learn about that coming in the future.
Good timing.
So today we are talking about NXIVM. Quick thank you and shout out to Haley, who's constantly sending us cases to research. And we actually have gotten this topic requested
for years.
I don't know if it's for years,
it's
but
for years.
Ashley says it's for years.
I could give you a list of people for years.
I read a couple books. I read Scarred by Sarah Edmondson, which came out last year. She is a prominent figure within the case. And I also read The Program, long title, Inside the Mind of Keith Raniere and the Rise and Fall of NXIVM by Toni, Natalie, which came out in the same year.
And me too.
And Ashley read the same. NXIVM was founded in 1998 in Albany, New York, and offers personal and professional development seminars through its Executive Success Programs, or ESP, and was founded by Keith Raniere, also known as Vanguard.
Keith Raniere is just the kind of sociopathic dweeb that you would expect to start a cult called NXIVM, in which he conned mainly women into believing that they would receive enlightenment by having sex with him and giving him all their money. While you're at it, you need to call him Vanguard because, as the NXIVM members put it, he's the leader of a philosophical movement.
Oh, God.
Keith Raniere is a short man around 5'6" with a less than appealing page boy haircut. If you've given him a gander online, if you haven't, do it. If you have, you know what I'm saying. He has rosy cheeks and glasses and isn't exactly the image that you expect when you hear that the guy had a harem of sex slaves who are all held together by the magic of his sperm, which is what he actually seriously tries to claim. He's been described by some that knew him as Little Lord Fauntleroy, if that gives you any idea what he's bringing to the table. All of these women were living on the glimmer of hope that they may be the one he bestowed his magical seed upon, so that they may have the honor of carrying his child, who he said would be the chosen one.
Oh, it's like Harry Potter.
It's who has the little scar of a
it's a lightning bolt, Ashley.
I know it's a lightning bolt, but for Keith Raniere it would not be a lightning bolt.
It'd be his initials.
It would be a flaccid penis.
Because he ended up having one. Anyway.
So he told women that they would achieve true enlightenment again through sexual intercourse with him. Sometimes they'd even see a goddamn blue light, he claimed.
Oh, God, please.
He said that it was a powerful energy exchange, but they had to keep it under strict secret, of course, because to the members of NXIVM as a whole, he touted himself to be a celibate, enlightened, Buddha-like character for the most part. Oh, gosh. So he fancied himself a philosopher king, ruling over his followers. His word was gospel. He told you what was right. He told you what was wrong. And he was always right. That is something that was really impressed upon the NXIVM students, that Raniere called it rational inquiry, which is essentially brainwashing someone, as cult leaders are wont to do. He used coercive persuasion techniques to gain undue influence or the causing of someone to act against their free will over his students. He was gross and abusive, and the more you look into it, he was also a pedophile. So which came first, the white male cult leader or pedophilia? That's the question I want to know.
That's the question I always want to know.
It's crazy. It's always there.
It's such a prominent trait of all of these. Yes.
It's honestly probably has something to do with the power aspect of the whole situation.
Yeah.
And that is something else that, like I've talked about that I want to somehow look into, but I don't really know how you do it, is the pedophilia with powerful figures and how it seems like the powerful people seem to get to a point where nothing normal is enough, I guess.
Yes,
they're so powerful that they need to do something that's not allowed. And it seems like pedophilia is always the go-to, unfortunately. But like all cult leaders, and while that designation can be argued in this case, we call a spade here at Creep It Real. This awkward little dweeb really came alive on stage once he felt the love from an adoring audience. And the people who saw him when he was quote unquote on said that it felt like he was focusing 100% of his attention on you and only you. And he was able to do some serious mind manipulation like all cult leaders are able to do. He was
a self-described genius, and while he may not have been a genius in the sense that he was actually a genius,
right,
he was a master manipulator and a genius when it came to manipulating people and making them feel like all of his attention was on you and making you bring your guard down.
Right. And I think, I honestly do think he might be quite intelligent, but it doesn't really matter when you're such a fucking creepy dweeb.
Yeah. Between 1998 and 2018, NXIVM developed a following through these aforementioned methods and recruited several celebrities and socialites, including Allison Mack from Smallville, Nikki Klein from Battlestar Galactica, who is married to Allison Mack not because they are truly in a lesbian relationship, but because of immigration laws.
Oh, okay.
Grace Park, who was also from Battlestar Galactica, and Kristen Kruk from Smallville as well, who had actually introduced Allison Mack to NXIVM.
It's a big celebrity ball.
Huge. So these celebrities were actually kind of big celebrities at the time. Smallville was huge when I was in junior high school and high school, I think. And I remember Battlestar Galactica being pretty big as well.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, Battlestar Galactica was big for like 2 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Prior to NXIVM, however, Keith Raniere founded Consumers Byline Inc., or CBI, which was where his culty practices started. He was born in Brooklyn in 1960. He was an only child, and his father worked in advertising while his mother taught dance. According to him, by 2 years old, he was speaking in complete sentences, and at 4, he demonstrated an understanding of the rudiments of quantum mechanics.
I bet you did. When his parents divorced when he was 8, he and his mother would move to an affluent suburb in Rockland County, New York, where he was sent to private school.
Although clearly he didn't need them with that little genius of his.
I'm sure he could have taught himself just about anything.
He should have been teaching the teachers.
Yes, for sure. Oh.
At 12 years old, over a long weekend again, according to him, he taught himself advanced algebra, geometry, trigonometry, and calculus.
On the one long weekend?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, he was just bored.
Okay.
In the same year, he became the East Coast judo champion for his age bracket.
Talk about fucking achieving, man, from an early age. Isaac goddamn Newton taught himself calculus when he was bored at one point, but it took a lot longer than one weekend. And he didn't also teach himself 3,000 other things on the same weekend.
I mean, talk about the ultimate one-upper.
Oh my gosh. What a dork. He claims at 13 he was taking college classes in mathematics and computer science, and he left high school early in order to enroll in the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, the well-regarded technical university in Troy, New York. And by 22, he had earned undergraduate degrees in physics, mathematics, and biology, which required 60 additional credits, as that was 3 majors.
At 27, he answered 46 of the 48 questions on an impossible brain teaser test given by Mega Society, placing his IQ between 170 to 180, although he claimed that his IQ was 240, which is higher than Albert Einstein's, who's 170, or Stephen Hawking, who's at 190.
And even a bunch more.
And so many more. And by the way, it was comprised of an untimed take-it-home test.
Oh my goodness. I didn't even read that part. Oh gosh. So this laughingly gave him local notoriety. And on June 26th of 1988, the Albany Times-Union ran a piece about him for their Sunday Living Today section under the headline, Troy man has a lot on his mind. IQ test proves what many suspected. He's 1 in 10 million. Oh. La 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 la. Very funny. The article explained how he was a, quote, amazing young man who requires only 2 to 4 hours of sleep, which is not a fucking thing.
No, not at all. Are you kidding me?
Humans require sleep, and while the requirements vary from person to person, they're not too far off from the standard 7 to 9 hours.
And intelligence isn't the level of sleep that you need isn't predicated on your level of intelligence either.
Right. In fact, it may mean that you need more sleep. It was this very article that helped Raniere on his path to fame and fortune, and he would soon begin claiming that he was in the Guinness World Records for having the, quote, highest IQ, coming in hot with a frankly ludicrous, like you just said, 240, which, for the record, a woman named Marilyn Vos Savant, who was a Mega Society member and was actually listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as having the highest IQ at one point, has an IQ of 228. So I don't know about this guy who seems to be able to do very minimal tasks in life.
He arbitrarily picked 240 because he was like, oh,
that's it.
That's a good number.
It's higher than anyone I've ever heard of. It's definitely believable.
He was also a virtuoso musician who could play a ton of instruments, including piano, and Juilliard was after him. I can't. Well, even...
Hey, come to our school. We need you bad.
We need you so bad, yeah.
We have a lack of talented students over here at Juilliard.
No kidding. Even though he was contemplating a career as a concert hall musician, he found a higher calling. Multi-level marketing.
Oh.
And at 29, he and 4 of his friends founded Consumers Byline Incorporated, which we just spoke about, CBI.
That's really making a difference in the world, you know?
Oh, for sure. You know, when I think about myself, I think, how can I make the most difference in the world? Let me go ahead and get on Amway.
Yeah. Let me sign up somebody to have to buy leggings from me every month. I think it would be good.
Oh, LuLaRoe.
I think so. I think so. Something like that. There's some sort of name. In case you haven't caught on, I don't believe any of this nonsense Raniere attempted to pass off about himself.
You don't?
No.
You don't think he was a virtuoso?
No, I think he might have been lying a little bit.
Oh,
it's possible.
Weird.
Much like L. Ron Hubbard, who Raniere idolized and fashioned much of NXIVM after, he embellished the fuck out of his resume up until the very end. He was also like Hubbard in the way that he knew the way to make money was through religion. In this case, Raniere knew that the way to get his entire business funded was by collecting a few rich followers into a quote-unquote non-religion. But it really is, as we'll talk about, kind of elucidate. I'll talk about it a little bit more. But, get some rich converts and maybe they can fund your entire life. I feel like that might be how I feel too.
I feel like now. Maybe I should get some rich converts and fund my life.
That's a great idea.
It's just me.
When Raniere was 29, after a short time working for possibly the most famous pyramid scheme of yore, Amway.
Oh my God, how funny. I just said Amway.
I know. I thought you just... Okay.
No, I didn't. So he founded CBI, which we just discussed, and its model was as follows. Consumers would buy memberships to join the group, and their collective purchasing power would be enough to buy merchandise at wholesale cost.
Which is essentially the same idea as Costco and Sam's and all those others. They believe that once CBI reached critical mass, that it would be self-sustaining and would become an effortless revenue stream like that happens for anybody.
Well, because it's so easy, everybody does it.
Right. Followers felt Raniere made it different than just any MLM, that they were joining a new way of life somehow when they're just buying in bulk. But, do your thing, guys. If that is like a new way of life for you, I guess, go forth and
live your best life.
Right.
Raniere was the ultimate con man. He was able to mesmerize everybody he came into contact with, even those who question that if he was such a genius, why wasn't he on a mission to do good in the world? For instance, cure cancer, eradicate poverty, do literally anything substantial. Look, I don't have a problem if you believe in the product that you're selling. As a salesperson, I'm a salesperson. The one thing is that you believe in the product that you're selling. However, if you're such a genius, do something with your genius.
No, he's lazy.
Right. Well, obviously he wasn't a genius and he was just a con man.
He's lazy.
And that's just the way, that's the way Sue sees it. That's the way I see it. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. So Raniere was a homebody, which if you're filling your home with sex slaves, then
of course you are.
You know, aside from a short time spent on the lam in Mexico, he lived his entire life in New York State without ever really traveling outside of it. It was around this time that he began to encourage his followers to buy up properties in the same development or as close to it as possible in which he lived. He continued to encourage this for over 30 years as he wanted everyone as close as possible so he could walk over to Jane's house to gift her with some spiritual enlightenment sex and then later drop by Barb's for another selfless act. The Executive Library, which was the townhouse that operated as Raniere's main kinky sex lair, and at the time of his arrest, NXIVM affiliates owned more than 50 properties in and around Knox Woods, that same place. These were all located in this very same immediate area in which he had his little townhouse that he shared with 3 other women in which he had sex with all the time. The home itself looked normal from the outside, but the inside of his home was essentially a hoarder's house. There were food wrappers, there were dirty containers, dirty dishes, old mail, dirty clothes, rotting food was strewn on countertops, there was cat shit overflowing out of the litter box.
Gross.
Guinea pig cages lined entire walls.
Guinea pig cages?
Who the fuck knows? One of the girls that he lives with
had guinea pigs.
And there was hay in the house. They were like just shoveling hay into guinea pig cages, not cleaning them out, trying to cover up old guinea pig shit with new hay instead of actually cleaning the whole thing.
Fucking, oh my God.
The whole thing was a disaster.
My mom would have a fucking conniption.
Right. He was trying to take the whole messy genius thing to a whole
other level.
He continued to claim throughout his life that he requires little to no sleep, sometimes saying he hadn't slept for 2 days at a time, which meant that he got 35 extra hours of waking time a week. More than the average person. Wowie, wow, wow. He even claimed that sleep is for mortals. This is something that literally everyone I have ever heard make some sort of similar statement. I just don't need that much sleep. Is a grade A dumpster fire. You know, it's like, I can tell you, I could give you a list of people that have said that to me. And I'm like, you are a mess. A fucking mess. But for some reason, this made other people, the followers of Raniere. Sometimes I still don't want to say his name right.
I know.
They were in awe of this. They were like, oh wow, he only needs to sleep for 2 hours every 2 days.
How amazing.
What an enlightened individual.
I had a really abusive ex-boyfriend who was the same. He was like, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I'm like, shut up.
You're going to be dead a lot sooner if you act like that. Because you need sleep in order to live.
Everybody needs sleep.
But unfortunately, this left his subordinates attempting to emulate him, which kept up this insane and unhealthy pace that is not even really, once we get a little more into it, it's not even legitimate in his own life. Yeah. He just says all this stuff about himself, just like L. Ron Hubbard. It's amazing how someone can emulate somebody so much that he's like, he makes all these fantastical claims about himself. They're all just absolute bullshit. And then once you get to know him a little bit better, you're like, wait a second, this guy's sleeping all day.
Yeah.
Fuck this guy. Yelling at you because you want to sleep till 7 a.m.
Girl, bye. The dedication to Raniere was almost evangelical, to put it very mildly, and most of the members of CBI were women, shockingly.
What? What? I can't believe this. I can't believe that someone that wasn't having sex with him didn't want to be around him.
That's so weird.
There were only a few men, and like you said, many women even brought their teenage children with them to the group. In the book that we read, the program, the writer described one woman who brought her daughter who was around 12 or 13. The girl had braces, blonde hair, and sat around looking through an algebra textbook. Toni, the writer, is told that Raniere was tutoring the girl in math, which is, at the outset, they made it out to be like he was this kind and generous, amazing guy who
he had no time
on his hand, and yet still he was taking time out of his busy schedule to tutor this young girl.
So selfless.
Oh, and you know, we'll come back to that aspect in a little while. He roamed around the office in sweatpants and a dress shirt, glasses askew, looking like a slob, which is fine. I mean, we all do it sometimes. But somehow, to his followers, he managed to pull it off, and for some reason, they felt like this was just his genius. You know, like he's just a genius. He just can barely.
Oh my gosh, he can't pull himself together. He's so intelligent.
No, he can't put fucking pants on. He just has to. I mean, granted, I wear leggings every day, and
you're a genius.
and I'm a genius. But I mean, gosh, come on, dude. I can't even. I was like, I kept waiting for them to show him a picture of him wearing dress shirt and sweatpants, and I just never saw one. But of course, his office was a complete mess, and all the blinds were drawn so that it was a completely natural, lightless cave, which is similar to a lot of dudes I've known in my life. Yeah. Why is that? Why is that?
I don't know why they like to live in caves, but they do. But put some natural light into this room, sir.
Give me some windows in here. What is the deal with you guys?
You don't need gray paint, dark blue paint. It's not necessary.
What happened in your little lives that you feel like you need to live in a cave? It's just like they're trying to resort back to their very primal being, I guess.
Of being in the womb.
Oh, no. Back to caveman. So behind his desk, of course, were 3 whiteboards with mathematical equations.
Oh, this is the greatest.
Scribbled all over them, likely just to make his visitors think that he was over there being a super smart guy attempting to solve these equations.
I'm very smart, please.
Look at these mathematical equations. It's like the equivalent of somebody on a diet putting up their old pants. They're hung up beside the door frame so that they walk through the entryway and they just stand there posing so that you see, wait a second, did you lose weight? Oh, look how smart you are. You're doing math behind you.
Oh my gosh, just for fun.
What a goose. So his official company bio, which was obviously written by him, read as follows at the time because it's now defunct. Keith Raniere, president, CEO, notes as one of the top 3 problem solvers in the world. He has a problem-solving rarity of greater than 1 in 400 million. With degrees in mathematics, physics, biology, minors in psychology and philosophy, with expertise in computers and systems analysis, he's an expert at it all. He has utilized his problem-solving abilities to bring this company from 0 to $1 million company in less than 2 years. He personally recruited and trained 6 out of the top 10 producers in the national company with over 250,000 sales reps. Oh my God. Most of that we can all take and throw right into the bin. It's not true.
None of it is true.
He constantly recommended Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand as an excellent prerequisite to appreciating his own philosophy, identifying strongly with John Galt, the novel's main character, who was a self-made genius and ultra-productive member of society, something Keith never doubted about himself, delusional as he was.
So this was just another really narcissistic facet of his personality. I personally read Atlas Shrugged, which I think is a great movie, great book. But there are some things philosophically that I don't quite agree with necessarily. It's good to get a whole
perspective on real life.
A perspective, not on real life, but it's good to get a perspective on all of the different facets of philosophy.
Oh, I thought you were saying if you're going to read this, it's great if you also have read a million other things that are more real life.
Well, correct.
That give you some perspective to know that Ayn Rand was a fucking cunt.
Ooh, and then did you know that the Ayn Rand Institute also accepted PPP?
Oh, did they?
Yeah. Although they tout
charity
don't
is,
exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So
make your own way, everyone.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, it's okay to be selfish,
but that's such bullshit. It's a total. Nobody is all on the. It's just like Texas, which I love, my home state, but they're always like, we're fine on our fucking own, and then anytime a disaster happens or anything else, they're like, please, sir, can I have some more federal funds? It's just bullshit. I mean, it just goes uncalled out. It's so truly yes. Okay.
So he identified strongly with the most important character of the book, John Galt, who was a self-made genius. Didn't come from money, even though he went to private schools growing up. Right. So did you not come from money, or what's up?
Yeah, I know. He likes to probably put that on his resume. It's like, I had to struggle when I was a kid. He's like a rapper where they have to make their childhood less glorious so that they have more street cred. As most self-obsessed sociopaths feel, Raniere felt lonely and dissatisfied with
Nobody
life.
understands him.
Yeah, it's true. The ultimate edgy boy. Most of his close friends were women, and he lived in a townhouse with 3 of those women, whom they just fucked like willy-nilly, by the way. Pam Caffritz, Kristen Keith, who would later run his legal department, despite the fact that she was absolutely qualified in no way whatsoever, and Karen Unterrainer, who was Raniere's ex-girlfriend from college and the co-owner of CBI, because he had to have co-owners with him at all stops. He couldn't do anything on his own because, well, as we'll talk about, there's a reason for it. There's probably multiple reasons for it, in the sense that he probably didn't have any money on his own, but also he wanted to pawn off the responsibility for everything on everyone else, as we'll talk about, so that he
definitely
didn't have
hid behind women in his life,
so that he didn't have legal responsibility. But it didn't turn out to work out that well for him. Anyway, they all lived together in this townhouse, and that was a pigsty, an absolutely disgusting pigsty. He explained it like it was to save money, to grow their business, but in the end, it may have just been a way that he was able to carry on sexual relationships with each of them at his convenience and discretion, because he would do that for so long.
He did it for until he got caught.
Yeah. Toni Natalie, again, she wrote one of the books we read, The Program, was at one point a high-ranking member of NXIVM, before it was NXIVM. She had a relationship with Raniere and would later become enemy number 1 in his eyes. She says that while they were still getting to know each other, a topic that was of particular interest to him were the stories of her sexual abuse that began when she was 4 years old and went on until middle school. She says that he was an excellent listener and knew how to root it out, especially how to exploit it and make it seem like what he was doing was out of love. He would then plant seeds of doubt about your husband, your significant other, your family, your friends, isolate and destroy tactics 101. And much like Bill Gothard, who we discussed in episode 53, Raniere would really hone in on those stories of abuse and seem to get off on hearing the details repeated over and over and over again. Toni was saying that in one session with him where it was going on for hours, maybe even like an entire day. She wasn't allowed to eat or sleep, and he kept telling her, just keep repeating the same story over and over. And I can't even imagine. I mean, obviously that's a mental abuse tactic, but it's also like he seemed to derive some sort of pleasure out
from
of it, which is
sure.
disgusting. As a normal person, should be disgusted to hear about an uncle, molesting a 4-year-old girl, but not to him. Jim. But as great as it seemed at the outset, the issue with CBI was that memberships themselves were not a tangible commodity, and so legally speaking, they operated in a gray area. The memberships had to provide the promised steep discounts, and if they stopped doing so, the operation became unlawful. In 1992, this is what happened. Complaints began to flood in from dissatisfied members, discounts weren't materializing, and commissions weren't paid on time. Keith would blame it on either the vendors for not fulfilling their contractual obligations, or the IT people for fucking up the computers, or the affiliates themselves. But of course, it was never on him.
Of course not. He's always right.
All right. He said, not everyone has the mental capacity to appreciate what we're trying to do here. Sell things in wholesale. He says not everyone is integrated. Like all pathetic dweebs, he loves to play the victim, and most of the staff at CBI was happy to accept his explanation that the government was just out to get him. For quite some time, only Raniere and Karen Unterrainer knew about a class action lawsuit that had been filed in Massachusetts against them. And another was filed by the Attorney General in Arkansas, along with investigations that were underway into CBI that were going on in Maine, New York, and Pennsylvania, all of which accused them of being a pyramid scheme. They ended up having to pay Arkansas and Pennsylvania between $20,000 and $25,000 each for non-compliance with state regulations. Members of CBI also had no idea about the sexual harassment suit that had been filed against Raniere by a former CBI employee at a time when sexual harassment was still sadly a somewhat novel concept back in 1992. Raniere quietly settled the case out of court, and the rest of CBI continued on, seeing only what they wanted out of their precious leader. And, whenever they're making deals out of court, what do you really expect them to be doing, I guess, as far as they're not going to be digging into the goings-ons of their precious leader.
No.
Eventually, though, they could not keep it all under wraps.
So then in 1992, same year, the Albany Times-Union ran an article about CBI under the headline, Discount Service, Target of Probe, Pyramid Scheme Alleged. The article called into question the legality of CBI and Raniere's IQ test.
Why?
I don't know why. It's so weird. And stated that the company was being sued by the Arkansas Attorney General for using deceptive trade practices.
So this article read, Consumer Bylines Inc. is being investigated by authorities in New York and Maine and has been sued by the Arkansas Attorney General for allegedly using deceptive trade practices. They're essentially operating what appears to be an illegal pyramid, said Perrin Jones, a spokesman for the Attorney General of Arkansas. In 1988, Raniere garnered local attention when he qualified at age 27 for the elite mega society by demonstrating an IQ of 178. So it's funny because they called him out on his own.
Of course.
Now, I will say this, like I said, 178, if that's true,
is impressive.
High.
Congratulations.
Way to go, buddy. But he wasn't going to be okay with just being higher in intelligence than Einstein. He needed to be smarter than everybody
in the world that ever existed.
Oh, God.
Then, faced with incontrovertible proof of his duplicity, Raniere vehemently insisted that the government was out to get him.
This is kind of like all sociopathic narcissists. He doubled down on his own personal narrative that the government was out to get him.
Nobody's out to get you, I promise.
None of them knew. None of them were saying anything that was true.
The government isn't out. The government doesn't care about you.
Well,
just so you know.
They're out to get all of us, really. You know,
they're just out for they are out for themselves.
Yes.
They're not out to get somebody and singularly exploit
dummy.
somebody.
Right. So he said, they don't understand what we're trying to do here. They don't like we're trying to help people. They don't want us to change the world. The funny thing is they all claim they were doing all these things to change the world, but they weren't doing shit. And they can't even really tell you what they were doing to enact these amazing changes in the first place. If you watch any of the videos they released on YouTube, it's just a bunch of nonsensical babble.
It's so uncomfortable.
It's so weird.
It's so uncomfortable.
Not only are they not doing anything, they're not even saying anything meaningful.
There's nothing there are no synapses that connect there. I'm like,
so
what are you talking about?
Yes, it's so bizarre. Oh, we'll talk about it later, but it's bizarre. And I would encourage you to watch it if you're interested in this topic.
Yes.
But anyway, so he gave out copies of The Little Prince to everyone at CBI. He made them watch The Man Who Planted Trees and was hinting that both the heroes in the children's stories were misunderstood geniuses just like him. That was the positive change he must have been making in the world. Listen, I'm a genius. Read this kid's book. I'm a genius. Just like this guy. His followers just ate it up, though, believing the journalists were just liars and the multiple state attorneys were just vindictive. You know, I'm the last person to be touting the wonders of district attorneys, but
For sure.
But this sounds eerily familiar to a current leader we are all too familiar with at this point.
I don't know who you're talking about, so we're going to keep going.
He made and distributed a 5-minute video message to his affiliates, imploring them to rat out any of their colleagues who dare demand, illegally, that affiliates must be members. He said, we need to keep all correspondence confidential, and we will reward any person that leads us to an offender. That is how serious we are about running our business right. After all, wouldn't you rather be involved with a company that demands the highest ethical standards? Though typically when you have high ethical standards, you don't need to make videos desperately attempting to convince anyone of it.
But you don't?
No. You know, shockingly. But of course, the CBI lackeys thought the video was a work of art.
So guess what? His followers all believed him over all of those liars at the Times-Union and also the vindictive state attorneys general. But it wasn't just the law that was after Raniere. Jilted CBI members also wanted him dead. And on September 15th of 1992, a disgruntled Vietnam vet sent Keith Raniere a letter stating that he conned his sister into getting into CBI, and she in turn sold what she bought into to her family, who all pooled their money together in the hopes that they could simply eat. He called Raniere a well-taught crook and told him not to step a foot in Maine.
That's very sad, because I remember reading that too, and he was saying they pretty much ruined all of their lives.
It was really sad. They all depended on this particular Vietnam vet for financial support, and he was the one that was feeding all of them. It was really terrible to read.
So those are those positive changes that you're making in the world, right, Keith?
Yep.
He was, by all definitions, a chaos agent by design. He was the biggest impediment to the business becoming successful, 100%.
At the time, CBI was generating $1 million a month in profits. And it was at this point that he started descending from the L. Ron Hubbard type of cult leader, a charismatic con man. Not that he was an angel, into David Miscavige, a tyrannical, paranoid, demeaning dictator.
Ew.
He would take pleasure in bringing in employees who were in their own right truly extraordinary and humiliating them.
What a little bitch, dude.
Absolutely. At this stage of his paranoia, he would accuse the government of spying on him. Again, they don't care about you.
We got Eileen Mornos over here.
Opening his mail and tapping his phones. He would go into the CBI offices late and stay there well past midnight, and in the daytime engage in endless raving monologues denouncing all of the torment the government was subjecting him to.
I was honestly starting to wonder to myself if he has some mental instabilities.
He has to.
Or does he have a drug problem?
It does sound like somebody with a drug problem.
I know. So sometimes this would mean scheduling a meeting and not showing up for hours later. He grew increasingly paranoid, saying, like you said, the government was spying on him, opening his mail, tapping his phone. He was a raving lunatic when he was at the office, and I don't think that probably shocks anybody.
No.
But it's true. In reality, in order to get old Johnny Law off his back, Raniere just needed to pay the settlement money, change some of the language in CBI's legal documents, and hand over the day-to-day operations to the extremely qualified senior management.
But he point blank refused, as this would mean he would have to admit he'd made a mistake. And Keith Raniere never made mistakes.
You know what? To me, that really shows the sign of a weak individual. If you can't
admit a mistake, I completely agree.
So it's amazing that they can see this and still
follow him.
But like I was talking to you about this yesterday, it's hard to wrap my brain around the psychology of being a cult member.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? Yeah, that's true.
It's a hard. And there's books written specifically about that we could read and talk about, but it's just it's hard to get into. More stories came out, such as the Albany Times-Union, which loved to cover this idiot, which stated that the New York State Attorney General Robert Abrams was alleging that Consumers Byline was a pyramid scheme that was going to leave its participants empty-handed after the organizers of the company had reaped all the money there was to be had. Shockingly enough. As usual, Raniere blamed the Times-Union and the author of the article, Christopher Ringwald, saying that, I don't know why I was trying to say it like a German.
I don't know, you said it like super German.
So strange.
Ringwald.
Saying that they were all out to get him, including the government and the media. He said they have decided I'm dangerous and they want me silenced. They want only to destroy the good thing we've built. Dangerous in what way? Other than that you were able to convince women to have sex with you and give them your money. Good grief.
9 states eventually found CBI sleazy, and in the end, 22 state attorneys general and 2 federal agencies sued CBI.
They had built cases which evaluated whether or not they had merit and then decided to pursue the cases. So there was obviously ample evidence that there was something going on here. If CBI were truly so clean and proper, why would an attorney general who is getting paid off of corporate tax money attempt to destroy a company? But again, Raniere would never admit defeat, never admit he made a mistake, and refused to play along with any of them in order to make CBI's legal woes disappear. It was at this time that Toni Natalie said that he would let himself into her house late at night, demand sex, and she would leave for work while he slept well into the afternoon. So he doesn't need sleep, does he?
No.
He would demand sex on a daily basis, and if she said no, he would rape her. She says he would justify this by saying that only through, quote, energy exchange via sex could their relationship fully heal. She said that there were some nights where she would have to lock herself in a closet rolled into a fetal ball to avoid his relentless assault.
And by the way, she was married at the time. She was married to another person at the time, and the reason that she was so enamored with Raniere was because her husband took her to a CBI congregation, meeting, whatever. And she wanted to go out for a cigarette, and he invited her back to his room or his little office, and he hypnotized her into not needing to smoke a cigarette any longer, which is great. And hypnotherapy really does work. Mm-hmm. But this was where like she started her adoration for him because he cured her of her nicotine habit.
Right. She also had said in the book that he was oddly, this is kind of a weird thing probably to mention, but he like oddly couldn't really get satisfaction from sex, so he would just want to have sex like time after time after time. She thinks that it has something to do with his psychopathic nature, that he like couldn't get a release from having sex, so he just wanted to have sex all the time. So while they were still together, she found a pile of photos he'd taken of her while she was asleep and naked. He then obviously had to cover her back up and then never told her about this. When she found these pictures, she freaked out, obviously, and told him to never do it again. But this would be a running theme in the group, as we'll talk about later. New initiates of NXIVM's inner circle, DOS, would be forced to do something very similar, but they were actually forced to do it of their own volition. And at one point, Toni said she met up with a woman named Nancy Salzman, who we've kind of touched on a bit already, but we'll talk about it now.
A fucking piece of work.
She is.
So Nancy was a forerunner in neurolinguistic programming, or NLP, and hypnosis. Together, she and Raniere claimed that the programs that they were hugging with the executive success programs had a, quote, main emphasis to have people experience more joy in their lives.
So this neurolinguistic programming was something that was really big in the 90s. It's something that Tony Robbins was also an expert at. And I actually had used that type of, I don't know, I guess you can say programming to help clients whenever they would wake up in the middle of the night and couldn't go back to sleep. It's like brain distraction, where you just focus on your senses and you go over them and over your 5 senses over and over and over until it distracts your brain and you're able to go back to sleep, which actually did work, but it's also since then kind of been debunked a little bit as far as it being some sort of really amazing therapy.
Yeah. I was using it with sales, as far as like sales were concerned, and like doing body language stuff. Okay. And that was like something I was taught right when I was put into sales.
Oh, okay.
And I thought it worked, but maybe it's just a matter of psychology.
Yeah, I mean, it probably does help to be more observant of the person that you're talking to and stuff like that. Okay, so Toni met with Nancy to try and work through some things, much like therapy. And she told Nancy of Keith Raniere and their tumultuous, abusive relationship, how he claimed to be a genius who was always just overwhelmed with thinking to the point that he could do virtually nothing and was incredibly lazy. Nancy quickly said, "Oh, that's easy. He's a psychopath. I can help you with that." But by their next meeting, Raniere had intercepted Nancy after Toni told him about her. He met with her for 4 separate sessions, manipulated her and the information that he gave her, and convinced her that he was actually the genius savior that he claimed to be. He watched her teach a class called Irresistible Communications and told her afterward that he knew he had to work with her. She herself was a master hypnotist and, like you had said, and proponent of the teachings of Milton Erickson, who was an orthodox believer in trance and the power of the subconscious and post-hypnotic suggestion. It's not thought of to be like a legitimate therapy, obviously. She was the founder of a brief solution-based model of therapy, which, let us emphasize the word brief, like let us hurry up and give you the quote-unquote answers to your problems in a short period of time, which doesn't really make sense, as traditional psychotherapy can last years long and still not even get to the root of the problems. But they were just like, hurry it up, let's go, come on, we gotta figure it out.
Clearly, Nancy Salzman was cut from the same cloth that Raniere was, saying that she was a psychologist, NLP expert, hypnotherapist, yada, yada, yada. But the truth was that she didn't even have a degree in psychology. She was a nurse. She got her first job working as a nurse with her first husband. And as great as NLP has been touted, it really is a pseudoscience, which we just discussed. But she was very well trained in hypnosis.
Right. Toni said she was almost like she thought of her like a witch because she could just do stuff to her so easily. She came from a long American tradition of snake oil salesmen, something Keith Raniere once played in a local theater production of Sweeney Todd, by the way, kind of a foreshadowing into his further future, selling people on bullshit and quick human empowerment through self-awareness and, quote, ethical behavior.
That's something that they used a lot, too, is the phrase ethical behavior, just to make people a little bit more cognizant about their own actions and be like, oh, am I being ethical?
Right.
When
Even
they themselves were being completely unethical.
Right, exactly. It's like the meaning of ethics is definitely subjective, especially in this case when, as we'll talk about, some very questionable things were considered to be ethical.
Right.
Nancy would later become Raniere's first true acolyte, who would be known by other NXIVM members as Prefect. This would be the pivotal moment for NXIVM, as she was exactly what Raniere had been searching for all his life. She allowed him to become what would be known as Vanguard. Putting Nancy and Raniere together was a dangerous combination, as they were both frauds attempting to pass themselves off as much more. Keith Raniere in all the ways that we have yet to discuss, and Nancy attempting to pass herself off as a psychologist with appropriate credentials, working at a job in that capacity. She was having to have a colleague file her claims for her, which was obviously incredibly illegal.
Is it?
Maybe. And Raniere knew about this, and in his eyes, he now had compromising information on her that he could use as, quote, collateral, which he could release at any time to cause maximum damage to her career and reputation, which is a common procedure in organizations conducting illegal activity and cults. And also, we'll see this happens a lot later.
Mm-hmm.
But before such extremes could be more than a glimmer in his little eyes, the two became almost instant business partners.
So additionally, she brought with her a huge backlog of corporate clients, and the original intent was to cater to large corporate clients rather than individuals. However, those large corporate clients Googled him and saw his stellar back record.
Right.
And they point blank refused to work with Raniere.
Right. So it quickly fell apart, and they had no choice but to go back to the old MLM model once again. The pair would spend the early months of 1998 developing the coursework for the program. Raniere focusing on the big picture stuff, coming up with the, quote, rules and rituals, which were guidelines for ESP sessions that would reinforce his status as the slightly unapproachable man high at the top of the pyramid. He drew heavily from the martial arts community with use of sashes to denote rank, enforcing that ESPers bowed to their superiors.
By the way, those sashes, I watched a documentary about NXIVM survivors, and she had one of the sashes. God, they look like such low quality. Not that it's better if it's a higher quality sash, but Jesus Christ. Put some money into your sashes, homeboy.
Yeah, you seem like you have enough money to buy a decent non-dollar store sash.
And in these sessions, there were pictures of, quote, Vanguard and Prefect, and they would be displayed prominently to show respect and to give tribute, kind of like North Korea does with their dear leaders. And students were also asked to make a list of other professional settings in which titles were used to kind of start that whole process of desensitizing them to really weird shit.
Right. So just like CBI, ESP would be a multi-level marketing company, but instead of members and affiliates, they would have students and coaches, which makes it so much different. Mm-hmm. And unlike CBI, where they sold consumer goods at discounted prices, at ESP, they were selling classes on increasing human potential.
The students would recruit others to take the courses, then followed by more courses, a la Dianetics, until the student was A, broke, or B, enlightened.
Yeah, like he couldn't have just ripped off Scientology anymore if he tried.
No. He really took everything from Scientology. Mm-hmm. And by the way, Raniere took Vanguard from his favorite arcade game of the same name. So lots of thought put into it, obviously. And from now on, I would like to be referred to as Fallout New Vegas, please.
Oh, God.
It's not an arcade game, but it's my favorite game.
The belief of Nancy and Raniere and their objective was to, quote, coach anyone to do anything they want, think the way they wanted, and view the world the way that they wanted them to.
She knew how to manipulate people almost as well as he did. She was smart, she was charismatic, and she could lord over everyone else while surrendering herself completely to Raniere.
Gross.
Like CBI, ESP would be another MLM like we just talked about, because clearly those who are in MLMs don't know how to make money in an ethical way once they've figured out how to make $10,000 in a month. I don't know, go to school, go make something. Don't feed off of the desperation or the ambitions of others.
Yeah. Hey,
That's
don't
just
you
me.
want to buy some skincare?
No, you know what? I have experience with my family in an MLM, and while they made money, they realized that it was unethical, and they were like, we're out. Peace. The first lesson in ESP was the proper handshake. Placement of the left hand denotes rank, and individuals of higher rank place their left hand on top. Individuals of the same rank shake vertically, and individuals of lower rank place their left hand on the bottom.
Oh my god. This was clearly very arbitrary, but it did set the tone for new students to feel inferior to the person running their session.
Oh, for sure.
Who was then inferior to prefect, or Dancy, who was then also, as we've seen time and time again, of course, inferior to Vanguard, or, Keith. From the very first moments of the first day within the ESP program, Raniere was subtly letting everyone know that he was the master, and every single other person in the organization was to be his devoted submissive. And as we go along here, you will realize I literally mean his submissive in the BDSM sense. Mm-hmm. The very most important priority in early ESP sessions was that they must normalize unusual behavior with the student. This is the framework of cultist methodology. Take everything the new member knows and make it wrong, foreign, and introduce them to a new normal that they can begin to adapt to. And soon enough, you've created an entire universe all your own, and they can barely function in regular society without you.
One of the first exercises we talked about was taking a list of the organizations that actually use titles. And then another exercise was to make a list of as many organizations that they could that require their members to wear some sort of garment to meetings or uniforms to work. So things like EMTs, doctors, baseball players, cops, etc., etc. And they were explained to that just like these jobs, they would be given sashes in different colors like we just discussed, signifying measurable achievement and contribution to the ESP mission.
Oh.
Rank was signified similar to belts used in martial arts and was described as the stripe path, and each sash was earned on the basis of your skill with the tech, or how many courses you'd taken, how many people you'd enrolled, and how many integrations you'd experienced, thanks to one's dedication to working out old, unsuccessful, emotional patterns from your past.
Oh.
The progression of the sashes were white for student, yellow for coach, orange for protector, green for senior protector, blue for counselor, and only one person had reached this in the company's history, and the color was probably made for him or her, but probably him. Purple for senior counselor, and a gold sash for those individuals who were also Nancy Salzman.
That's pretty specific. Now, in order to take this intro course to begin with, it was required to pay thousands of dollars at least.
What?
I think from what I gathered is that they kind of scale your payments based off of how much money you actually have, which would make sense considering that I saw some, struggling actors paying $2,000 to take a course. And then there are people like the Brandman, I can't remember their names, but the Bronfamans who had unlimited funds and could pay, $50,000 to take a 16-day course. So I think it was like, don't talk about the amount you paid because we're all donating based off of our own abilities. If that could be how we do taxes, that would be great, but it's how you take this dumbass course.
It is how you do tithes, though. 10%.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Weird. It's not a religion, though.
No.
It's fine.
And being that everyone attending has paid this large sum, they were more than happy to acquiesce to his stupid ass ideas and demands, even if it seemed pretty ludicrous at the outset. And like we said, these rules and rituals set the tone, letting everyone know that Raniere and Nancy were at the top of the totem pole. All the students had to climb a tall ass ladder in order to achieve recognition within the group. They were all encouraged to keep up a competitive edge with one another, which we, to a degree is fine. And then there's another whole other level of it where it becomes an extremely damaging,
volatile situation.
Yes.
And the rest of the class was spent learning how to properly give tribute to one's superiors in ways such as removing your shoes, dressing properly, bowing, standing when a ranking official member entered the room, promising to keep everything strictly confidential, and reciting the 12-point mission statement, pledging to purge themselves of all parasite and envy-based habits, to enroll others in the same kinds of courses to ethically control as much of the money, wealth, and resources of the world as possible within the success plan. Which doesn't sound terrible at the outset. It sounds like, yes, it sounds fine.
Right.
Purge yourself of all parasite and envy-based habits. That's great. Mm-hmm. Do that.
Ethically control as much money as possible.
I don't know about that one.
I don't know that they were ethically controlling.
But I also don't think they were.
No. To Raniere, being ethical meant living selfishly, as we've mentioned, as he idolized John Galt, creation of the insufferable Ayn Rand. I just don't want to say her name right because she's such a piece of shit. And believed that people were either parasites or producers.
Mm-hmm. So really, behaving in an ethical way to Raniere meant to live selfishly. And selfishness is quite all right.
Which is, like, okay to a degree, too. Like, that's fine to a degree.
Selfishness is fine as long as you are practicing things like taking care of your own mental health. It's okay to be a little bit selfish with things like that. Mm-hmm. Anyways, NXIVM conducted what were called intensives, which were classes for 12 hours daily for 16 days. People paid about $7,500, and classes were divided into modules. There was relationship sourcing, in which students were instructed to explore the benefits they could receive in the event of a partner's sudden death. Not how to cope with that sudden death, but the benefits. What? So that's great.
Okay.
Dracula and his ghouls discussed psychopaths and their followers.
Like, there's no self-awareness here whatsoever, is there?
3 was best people, 4 was a perfect world, and 5 was the heroic struggle. They practiced exploration of meaning, and this involved senior members questioning newer ones as they delved into their childhood memories. Again, a la Scientology, with doing the
audits.
Mm-hmm. They also taught that some people, called suppressives, they're not even trying not to be Scientology, try to impede progress within NXIVM, and people who irrevocably turned against Raniere were said to have undergone the fall and labeled as Luciferians, who were people who were lost people for whom bad feels good and good feels bad.
Well, look at yourself in the mirror, Dick.
Members also organized Vanguard Week, which was an annual 10-day celebration of Raniere's birthday.
Sounds like a dream.
And by 2003, about 3,700 people had taken part of the ESP classes, one student of which was an Enron executive named Stephen Cooper. Birds of a feather, I guess.
Mm-hmm. In the ESP module that was called Parasites that began in 1999, it stated, stages of evolution are dependence, independence, and interdependence. They are also the basis of the producer-parasite model. Human beings are parasitic, unable to take care of themselves, depending on others for their very survival. As people grow and develop, they learn 2 types of strategies. The parasite strategy, that keeps people dependent on others and lowers their self-esteem, and the effort strategies, that create independence and raise self-esteem. Most people use both types of strategies in life, but mostly use the parasite strategies, which keep them in a perpetual state of dependence and low self-esteem. But, Raniere says, the term parasite is not a value judgment. Parasite does not mean a bad person. Good people can be parasites. They are just people who never grew to incorporate effort strategies. Okay, so this whole parasite and, producer model, this was really used within the ESP system as a way to weed out losers. They were essentially trying to keep the producers and kick out the ones that were going to immediately give themselves up as parasites. And then the main idea here was that they were like, well, some of you are natural born producers, but over time you've let your parasitic ways come sneak back in, and I'm here to help you get rid of that parasite. Like, I'm the cure for your parasite.
Don't worry, I got it.
Yeah, me, Keith Raniere. I'm gonna yank that parasite right out of you. Nancy was the self-taught mental health expert, and like we said, literally had no credentials whatsoever. She worked on the psychological aspects of ESP's modules, or what we like to call the everlasting curriculum.
Oh, God.
Because they would never stop.
No.
One of her classes that we mentioned earlier, called Irresistible Communications, which took place over the course of 8 goddamn months, they would meet 16 times over various weekends from 9:30 to 5:30 on Saturdays and Sundays, which really, what a way to spend your time
weekend.
off. Mm-hmm. In the class, she taught them how to break down and analyze the way people communicate. They studied body language, tone of speech, nonverbal communication, and various other aspects that were related to neurolinguistic programming. After lecture, the class would break up into smaller groups to begin to reveal their darkest, most private secrets to one another. And Nancy would then use her skills of hypnosis during this time, when the students were already doing a lot of recklessly emotional revealing that had no actual scientific basis whatsoever. They were, in general, incredibly reckless with the way that they conducted courses, obviously, because they had no training whatsoever or expertise in the matter.
And the thing is, she was listening to people's trauma and exploiting it against them.
Yes, exactly. Which obviously is very healthy. And it's like Joe, Bob, and Carol from Sam's were running a psychotherapy business. Yes. So no big deal. Just keep on doing your thing. Mm-hmm. The students were immersed in all things ESP, like you said, for 10-hour days. And they, like you said, they were called intensives for a reason, because it was essentially just bringing up trauma. It was just a 10-hour session of no food, no sleep. Let's just get all of your lifelong trauma out and try to handle it in a couple days. There were no safety measures that were in place in case of an emergency. And when someone did have a breakdown, the course of action was to isolate that person to calm them down, which surely from there, it would just work itself out. During one course in New York, there was a young woman from Mexico that had a psychotic episode and had been whisked away in a car. They drove her around to calm her like she was a crying baby. When that didn't work to calm her from reliving a lifetime of trauma in a few days, Lauren Salzman took her to a friend's house and gave her Valium. But the girl eventually woke up and continued to be in distress, and Lauren broke Valium into her food and fed it to her with a spoon. Eventually, the girl recovered, but I think we can all agree that is disturbingly unsafe. In another case of what could and did go wrong during ESP modules, at a class in November of 2002, an environmental consultant from Alaska named Kristen Snyder attended a 16-day intensive that was taught by none other than Nancy the bitch Salzman. While in New York, she met with Keith Raniere, who offered to be her, quote, mentor, and she was wowed by that. And he wanted her and her partner to come and attend a course together. Eventually, they did in January of the following year, and as the training progressed, Kristen began to act erratically. She was interrupting the class to make incoherent statements, which sounds a lot like the leader Keith, so I'm not sure what the problem is. She called her parents ranting and raving like a maniac. She told them she was single-handedly responsible for blowing up the space shuttle Columbia. What? She tried to stop sleeping because Raniere didn't sleep, right? And she also made claims that she was carrying his child, which made me wonder what kind of situation happened when he asked her to be his... Poor thing. You know, the mentoring thing is really just a way to have her be his sex slave. Mm-hmm. On February 6th, she was ordered to leave the intensive by an instructor named Esther Chiapponi, because she was being disruptive. And when her partner Heidi asked if she could go with her to the hospital, Esther said she could not go. And that was the last time that Heidi would ever see her alive. Kristen's pickup would be found the next day in the remote town of Seward, Alaska, at a park site on Resurrection Bay. The Alaska Stadies would later state that Snyder had broken into a shed, taken out an old wooded kayak, and paddled out into the enormous bay and drowned. Her body was never discovered, but she did leave a suicide note, which said, "I attended a course called Executive Success Programs, aka NXIVM, based out of Anchorage, Alaska, and Albany, New York. I was brainwashed, and my emotional center of the brain was killed/turned off. I still have feeling in my external skin, but my internal organs are rotting. Please contact my parents if you find me or this note. I am sorry, life. I didn't know I was already dead. May we persist into the future."
What?
I don't know. That's obviously she was not doing well at the time.
No, clearly.
Raniere and the rest of the clan would later file a lawsuit against the Metroland Weekly in 2009, which published this letter, alleging that the suicide note was fake.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, after these sessions, the students would go home feeling thrilled, empowered, and eager to tell others about their experience and recruit them to join them in it. Even if the experience itself was traumatizing, it was somehow transformed by the end of it into some kind of heroic success that they were proud to have survived. And somehow still, that made them grateful and ever more subservient to Raniere. Just like John Galt, Raniere's solution was to collect all the producers and toss the self-admitted parasites into the garbage. Get them gone. A term Raniere liked to use to describe outsiders, like you said, was suppressives, which is just stealing from L. Ron Hubbard time and time again. And really, LRH shouldn't be anyone's goddamn idol. He was a freaking dork who, granted figured out a way to make a lot of money, but was just a mess. A total lying losery mess.
But money does not necessarily equal a good person.
No, definitely not. Outsiders were considered to be suspicious, and family was no exception. And so this little world that Raniere created became more and more isolated from the rest of the real world, and Raniere's word became unchallenged gospel, even more as it went along. In the curriculum, it explicitly warns that detractors will call them a cult, and further go on to explain that this is just a label that conveys meaning but devalues the group, and the goal is to make people want to avoid getting involved with the group. That's it. They were told to ask, what specifically makes the group a cult? Or, what do you mean by a cult? Their main argument was to be that the dictionary says that cults have to involve religion.
No, it doesn't.
And ESP has no religion in it, so what do you mean we're a cult? It's impossible.
Nope.
But really, even if it does say that, all religion is spirituality that someone has incorporated specific rituals and rules into in order to be a follower, and that was like step one in the whole ESP first day of school.
Yeah, just because there's no religion involved in it, it's a cult. There are political cults. There are spiritual cults.
Mm-hmm. And once the courses had been completed, there was always something new, something more involved, and something better that they were now offering that you needed to pay to complete so that you could level up. It's the standard upsell. They would accumulate hundreds of testimonials that sang their praises and that ESP worked wonders, listing any big notable names that they had as clients, such as sprinters, there was actresses, yet they never actually produced any results out of anyone.
So in the book, The Program, which we both read, the author, Toni, further delves into her experience with Nancy Salzman, again, who's unlicensed, and the trauma therapy she would do with her day in and day out. Toni had actually experienced sexual trauma in her young life and reflects on Nancy's classes. One module called Irresistible Communications, which we talked about a little bit, quite briefly, in which students were taught how to break down and analyze how people communicate. They spent time studying body language, tone, anchoring techniques, nonverbal communication, and at the end of the 8-month class, Toni was told that this would be the final class Nancy would teach, and there would be another class taught, which was the Executive Success Program's pilot program. God. In one of the lectures of the Executive Success Program's pilot program, Raniere himself was teaching, and he was talking about sexual abuse. He questioned, what is molestation and what is not molestation? He said, if a mother in an African tribe performs fellatio on a baby, is she a bad mother because she is molesting him? Or is she a good mother because she has soothed her child? And the answer to that, audience, is that she's a bad mother because she's performing fucking fellatio on her child. Are you kidding me?
Mm-hmm. A horrifying theme of ESP was normalizing sexual molestation, unfortunately. Years later, after that bizarre mother-child fellatio talk, Nancy was recorded in a lecture saying, in other words, when you're talking to a 12-year-old, does the 12-year-old understand the choice she is actually making? That determines whether it is abuse or not. Some little children are perfectly happy with it until they find out what happens later in life.
What?
In other words, at the time, they didn't know it was bad. They didn't know anything about it was bad. Later, they grow and they find out that it was actually something that was bad. In that case, is it more society that's abusing them?
No, it's not.
Because society says it's bad.
It's not society that says it's bad.
But they didn't know it was bad. Society is abusing them. It's more society's abusing them than the adult.
No,
because they didn't know it was bad. But society then tells them it's bad before they're bad.
Oh my God, I'm going crazy.
Something bad was done to them. So was it the adult or was it society? What in the good fuck are you trying to get out there, lady? So it's definitely the fucking adult, because a kid doesn't have the ability to consent to someone that is in a position of power over them to have fucking sex with them.
Like, oh my God.
But I guess that concept is a little beyond them at this point, considering that they're in a cult.
Right.
And this guy is doing the exact same thing to them. A little anecdote to better elucidate Nancy and Raniere's brilliance and emotionally enlightened levels of being. One day they were meeting Toni, Natalie, the author of the book, at a cafe, and they came in laughing their asses off. They explained that one of the new ESP recruits, a marathon runner, had been running in tight white clothes and got sweaty, and they were able to see her nipples and pubic hair. Hilarious! Like, even in any case, how is that hilarious?
Like, no.
But the disturbing aspect of this story is that the girl was a young high school student. They were kind of like those two friends that you have when they get together. You just know that shit was going to get stirred. Like, they encouraged the worst in each other, and they were here now, business partners.
They're such volatile human beings, and putting them together just made for this combustion that was just disgusting.
I'm not really sure why it's so hilarious.
It's not.
That someone's wearing white clothing and you see, I guess just because you're a fucking infantile.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's amazing how you're the smartest person in the world that's laughing at something so stupid. So ESP really took off like wildfire in Mexico, where members of many prominent Mexican families enrolled in classes and encouraged their high society friends to do the same. NXIVM would bring income that they earned in Mexico across the border, and they did not claim it as income, thus creating the situation for them to later be charged with money laundering, as we will get into. There was a 16-year-old girl named Daniela Flores, who was at the time at the top of her class. She had received a full scholarship to finish high school in the Swiss Alps. She dreamed of going to Harvard and then on to pursue a career in academic sciences. But then she took a course at age 16 in ESP. She was easily the youngest person in the room and was wooed with the scientific language of becoming integrated to follow the path of the only fully integrated human being on the earth, Raniere. They talked about his genius and how he was the only one who could save the world from the current path of destruction it was on. And however intelligent Daniela was, it could not overcome her naivete. She was sunk at 16, as you might expect. Lauren Salzman, Nancy's daughter, and one of Raniere's top recruiters. This is another thing that I was like, oh, look at this shit. So We've been hearing a lot about Jeffrey Epstein and how Ghislaine Maxwell was essentially his recruiter who would find girls and bring them to him. And this goes on in just about every situation where there is like sex trafficking or someone having this type of situation where you're molesting people or, you know, sexually abusing people. There's always some fucking complicit woman in here doing some dirty work. It really ticks me off to have such a traitor to our kind. So Lauren Salzman, one of Raniere's top recruiters, she told Daniela at the end of her 16-day course that she was very bright and should come with them to, quote, help the mission, which unfortunately really just meant get molested by Keith Raniere and do chores for him. Daniela decided to abandon her education in the Swiss Alps to move to Clifton Park, New York, to be, quote, tutored by the, quote, 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 smartest man in the world. In reality, she was smuggled into the country to do their bidding. Initially, Raniere didn't even talk to her, let alone tutor her. She had a couple books thrown at her initially and was told to teach herself things like computer programming, but then he began to groom her for molestation. Their first incident of sexual abuse was obviously traumatic for her and came a few days after her 18th birthday. So in that case, he did at least wait until she was technically legal, but the situation was fucked up as far as the power dynamic. After that day, she was forced to do menial tasks like cleaning, data entry, and being forced to perform oral sex on Raniere on command. In the end, she never finished high school and spent many formative years in what is now considered to be, to her, a learning experience in the cult. Luckily, she got out and went on to do better things in her life. Obviously, that's an amazing feat considering that he essentially just kidnapped her and took her to America. By the mid-2000s, Raniere was having sex with everyone in his inner circle that was attractive. Because, essentially, that's everybody, because he didn't keep anybody in his inner circle that wasn't up to his standards of attractiveness. And all of this sex resulted in a number of pregnancies and a number of abortions as well. Even though he was sitting around talking about how his chosen son might come one day, to the one special chosen person. I wonder how he figured out
who was chosen,
that these pregnancies weren't the chosen one.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But he did have a scripture, an NXIVM scripture to fulfill, and eventually he chose Barb Jeske in 2007 to magically come upon a newly abandoned baby whose parents had just been killed in a car crash.
Oh.
It was so stupid.
Yeah.
A little Moses story.
Yeah.
And so in 2006, he got Kristen Keefe, his little legal guru, even though she was not in any way qualified, pregnant, and she attempted to hide it from the entire group. One day, he found her in a pool of blood and took her to the hospital where she delivered a premature baby, who Raniere would eventually use as a way to make money, and ultimately as a way to traffic young women into the country under the guise of being special developmental nannies. He called it the Rainbow Cultural Garden. And this is what a woman who spoke to Toni Natalie said she was concerned about after some time in the NXIVM program in Mexico. She said that what she witnessed with the Rainbow Cultural Garden was that children were being taught that sex was beautiful, that it should be practiced in the open, and that they were trafficking young women for this purpose under the guise of employment. She said that what she witnessed was young girls being taught how to become sexual partners and that it was good for them to do so. She said Keith said explicitly that young people should have sex with adults, that it helps them to grow and learn to be humans. Right. Eventually, the Dominus Obsequious Sororium, or DOS, would be formed in the wake of one of Raniere's longtime followers, Pam Caffritz. Pam had essentially dedicated her entire life to Raniere, participating in group sex, hanging on his every word, and even recruiting and arranging for him to molest children, such as that 12-year-old girl that we spoke about at the beginning of the episode that he tutored. That we talked about earlier. Pam is the one who would set up for the 12-year-old to go, quote, walk a dog as a side job, which would put her in the position to be alone with Raniere and for him to be able to molest her. She eventually died of cancer, good riddance bitch, and sent Raniere into a tailspin of depravity that would know no bounds. And from this is what was born DOS, which was the inner circle of Raniere's harem.
So DOS, that Dominus Obsequious Sororium, is a Latin phrase that translates directly to master over slave women. So, cool. Yuck.
Oh,
yeah.
Cool.
But DOS was presented to initiates as a woman's empowerment group within NXIVM. Obviously, this was far from the truth. DOS was comprised of pretty, overachieving women who were also damaged and insecure in some way. He used that damage and insecurity to manipulate them.
Like all fucking sociopathic assholes do.
It was extremely secretive within NXIVM, and the most prominent members of NXIVM were not recruited into DOS, and the first 8 women recruited, called First Line, were actually more or less unaware of each other within the group. These female members were referred to as slaves because they were sex slaves, so of course they were referred to as slaves.
Right. They were required to eat very little, the bare minimum amount of calories, in order to stay rail thin, as we have learned Raniere likes them.
He said he liked them 100 pounds or less. So that's good. If you naturally you're 100 pounds or less.
Right. That's great for, yes. But if you're not, that is a hard task to achieve.
No.
There's a story of a teenager that we do talk about in a little bit, that he, molested at one point in his early 20s. And I might as well just let us take it. But she would weigh 130 pounds, and he was constantly hounding her to lose weight. The relationship for these DOS women took on a very explicit BDSM kind of concept, with the women giving up all power completely to Raniere, forming a 24/7 master-slave relationship. It was really disturbing to hear them talk about it. I think that you hear it and it's like, ooh, that sounds really not that bad. Ooh, that's sexy and stuff. But they have a lot of stuff they need to work through, and he is just manipulating and taking advantage of their not being completely 100% emotionally sound.
Well, the thing about that is that they also mentioned that he took 50 Shades of Grey and used that as a kind of a shining example as to what he wanted within his own group.
What a dork, dude.
Dude, I'm saying he doesn't have an original thought in his mind.
No, and anyone that's actually into BDSM knows that book is a bunch, and I'm not like I'm not an expert or anything,
right?
But I've spoken to people, and they're like, "It is embarrassing.
It's embarrassing." And I've read some stuff too where people are like, "This is embarrassing to our culture. Call it a culture to our subculture or to our culture, where it's entirely supposed to be a consensual relationship from both the dominant person and the submissive person. Completely consensual. Anyways, that's it. The second line slaves, those recruited by the first liners, joined under the pretense that it was an exclusively women's organization about women's empowerment. And they had no idea that Raniere wanted not only sex slaves, but like actual literal slaves.
Yes, the women, all of them, were not allowed to tell Raniere no about anything. He would go so far as to tell them that laying down their life for one's master was the ultimate sacrifice. There was a lot of talk about that, about suicide. I know that one story I read, they were like, in one of the intensives, they were saying, is suicide wrong? And if you said yes, then they were like, no, it's not wrong. Sometimes it's actually fine. Enlightened. There was always just like this thing. It almost seemed like they were slightly encouraging these women to sacrifice themselves. Yeah, of course. It's slightly bizarre.
They were normalizing behavior that is not
totally not.
That is abnormal.
Yes.
Second line slaves had to make their master the absolute focal point of their existence, and her wishes would take precedence over everything else. They would have to practice self-denial and perform acts of care for her, and they would have to participate in readiness drills in which they would have to respond to texts within 60 seconds, no matter what time it was.
I would be fucked.
No, there's no way. Absolutely
I have trouble answering texts for 3 weeks sometimes.
Right.
The women were forced to give collateral, such as nude or sexual videos and photos, and sign a big giant non-disclosure agreement, and they had to do this every single month. He was a little paranoid.
Meetings of the slave groups began with members removing their clothes and posing for what they called a family photo. And these photos had a stark emphasis on the vagina.
Just another way to every month get a little dirt on them.
A little something. And they were branded. Everybody kind of knows about the brands of NXIVM. It later came out that this brand was actually the initials of Raniere and Allison Mack. They were subjected to corporal punishment from their masters and required to provide nude photos, like we just said, or other damaging information about themselves as collateral. They would talk shit about their family. They would write out letters to their family, just talking all kinds of shit about them. And it was just used as this thing of collateral. Sarah Edmondson, who is the author of Scarred, was a Canadian actress who had been an ESP participant since 2005. And she provided additional context on the use of the collateral concept, stating that it was used in seemingly innocuous forms from the earliest outermost stages of NXIVM, just in order to acclimatize victims. For example, collateralizing small amounts of money that one might forfeit if they didn't go to the gym one day, and becoming more and more extreme from there, which we'll get to again in a second. She also mentioned that during her initiation, the girl she considered to be her best friend, Lauren Salzman, maid of honor at her wedding, godmother to her children, told her when seeing her discomfort with being naked that she had to get over her body issues.
Jeez.
NXIVM leaders and coaches would twist any and every reaction that was in contrast to its teachings and cause members to doubt themselves in a sick display of gaslighting. Lauren was the best recruiter for second-line slaves and was desperately in love with Raniere. He had promised her that she was going to be the mother of his chosen one child. And anytime she would leave, he would say, well, your time is almost here. Your time is almost here.
Oh, yeah. Just like everybody else.
Of course. During the initiation ceremony, she made sure that the women who were inducted that night all arrived exactly 15 minutes apart so that they wouldn't run into each other. And she gathered them all in a room, blindfolded them, and told them all to take their blindfolds off. And then she read from a computer screen, their initiation.
Okay.
She couldn't go on over to Kinko's to print out that initiation or whatever. Telling them that she was their master now, and the group's task was to serve, support, and help her with her mission. And that the ultimate spiritual exercise would be to learn to be less self-involved and focus their attentions on other, or her.
Convenient.
So convenient. Regarding the collateral we mentioned, she had bank account details, the nude photos we were talking about, and they were really graphic. She instructed the women to pose nude, showing their faces and their labia, and videos where they confessed their deepest, darkest secrets. This was all to ensure that they would never give up on reaching for their highest potential, and that to have that damaging information on the line would assure they all stayed on the path, and they would all receive matching tattoos as a sign of solidarity within the group. We know what the tattoos are. She then dismissed the group to get dressed for dinner, and Sarah said she noticed that her iPhone had been propped up on the mantle of the fireplace, but she would never have thought that Lauren would have filmed ladies naked without their consent. This was a women's empowerment group, by the way.
Sure it was.
After all, I mean.
Oh, yeah.
After dinner, they got into Lauren's car and put their blindfolds back on so she could drive them to the secret location they were going to. And the car ride that Sarah Edmondson describes is kind of like the car ride that they transported the Nazis in Operation Paperclip, where they're driving for what seems like forever, but is like still in town.
They're just driving in circles for 55 minutes.
Yeah. Well, the secret location was the home of Alice and Mac. They were all sequestered into a guest bedroom, unblindfolded, and told they must not leave unless to use the bathroom. And if they did have to go to the bathroom, they had to put the blindfolds back on so they couldn't identify where they were. Jesus Christ. They were told to strip again, now to their underwear, and there was a massage table in the room. Danielle Roberts, who was the resident doctor for NXIVM, then entered the room, and according to Sarah Edmondson, this is when Lauren Salzman finally showed her tattoo, which she said she wasn't allowed to see until her initiation. It was described in the book as raised, red, inflamed, and like a hunk of meat. So, obviously not a tattoo, it's a straight brand.
Yeah.
At Sarah's protest, Salzman assured her that it fades, and it's a symbol for the 4 elements.
How?
Not a very obvious K and R. Salzman then pulled Sarah aside and reminded her that she's also a green sash, and therefore one of the highest ranking members in the company, and she needs to show the others how to do this. You're a green sash, ma'am.
Oh,
I'm a green sash, that's right.
In that case, I can fly.
They instructed the first girl, whose name was Gabriella, to get on the table, and instructed all of the other girls to hold down a part of her body so that she wouldn't be able to move and mess up the fine lines of the tattoo.
Yeah, those fine lines they gave her.
All of the women were given surgical masks, so just imagine. All of these naked women, except for Lauren and Danielle, wearing surgical masks, holding down this woman's extremities. It's something out of a 1970 Dario Argento horror film. As the cauterizing tool makes contact with Gabriella's flesh, she screams out in pain, and the girls continue holding her down for 45 minutes. And then the next woman hopped on with no hesitation. Now, although DOS was touted as a women's empowerment group, what they were not told was that their master's master was Raniere.
Oh, what?
In addition to demanding that they limit their daily intake of calories, as he liked women to be 100 pounds, waxing or the grooming of pubic hair was not allowed. They were not allowed to masturbate.
What do you mean? Wait, they had to have unmitigated bush?
Yes.
Okay.
They were not allowed to masturbate, which would make them easier to control since they were unable to relieve their pent-up sexual frustration.
How do you prevent me from masturbating? Go ahead and try.
And this also helped when they were given the assignment by their master to seduce him. Of course.
What an assignment.
Of course, they didn't realize that the task was given to them by Raniere himself. And as he was almost 60 years old, short, pudgy, creepy, and what they thought was a renunciate, the seduction mission's response was always a shock and that of discomfort and disgust.
No way.
One of the slaves was so at a loss as to how she should seduce him that all she could come up with was that his glasses were sexy.
I think your glass is sexy.
And he was like, you gotta do better than that. But anyways. So he had sex with some of them, he went down on some others, and he watched as some of the slaves went down on each other for this seduction mission.
Mm.
I had read that NXIVM is theorized to derive from the Latin word nexum, which is a contract of bondage common in the Roman Republic, in which debtors put themselves up as collateral. I don't know if that even
if that's
works
true,
there.
and it doesn't sound like a real great arrangement. So Raniere's sexual exploits were, however, not only limited to grown women. There were also accounts of pedophilia that went way back to his early 20s. Back in 1984, when Keith Raniere was 20 and living in Troy, New York, he molested a 15-year-old girl named Gina Hutchinson, who he convinced would be better off if she dropped out of school and just learned from him, the smartest man in the world, than subject herself to the patriarchal brainwashing that she'd get from the public education system.
Well, because what they were touting was not patriarchal at all.
Like I said, I was about to say.
Sorry.
And you smash the patriarchy by following the gospel of a rapey older man and getting molested by him. He instilled in her a belief system that society was brainwashing us against our true natures, disempowering women, and the sexual restrictions that were rampant were really there to keep women down. It's not that I necessarily disagree with the idea of it per se, because it's true, but the execution is very misguided by more patriarchy. As we know that at heart, Raniere was staunchly anti-feminist. 100%. Yes, 100%. But as is his character, when Gina began to question his controlling behavior, his philandering, while requiring her to remain faithful, he just threw all kinds of psychobabble nonsense at her, all with the underlying idea that it was all about her empowerment. And this will carry on through NXIVM, as we've heard. But Gina herself would stay in the realm of Raniere for years, working with him at CBI even. Eventually, she would go to college and become deprogrammed enough to want to break ties with Keith Raniere. When she did this, he would send his quote-unquote girls to berate and harass her, much like many other people. Eventually, in 2002, at age 33, Gina holed up at a Buddhist monastery in Woodstock, New York, after her mother had died. She had been acting erratically, sending dear possessions to her friends, and eventually her body was found in a stream in the woods nearby. According to police, she committed suicide by shooting herself in the head. In fact, as the Albany Times-Union told in 2012, do you remember that blonde teen Raniere was so kind to spend his precious time tutoring?
Oh, no.
Well, this is a whole other one, but one woman was just a girl in 1990, a 12-year-old with feathered bangs and long blonde hair who was just trying to adjust to a new life following her parents' divorce and a move to the country in Clifton Park, New York. Her mother was a saleswoman for Raniere's members-only buying club, and when he offered to give the girl free tutoring, her mother jumped at the opportunity. He was supposed to be teaching her Latin and algebra. Instead, she said he taught her how to hug the way adults do, pelvis to pelvis. And let me assure you, girl, we do not all hug pelvis to pelvis.
No.
He took her virginity, even though the girl was several years shy of the legal age of consent, which in New York is 17. So at the time, she was a goddamn, 12 or 13. Raniere continued to have sex with her, not only in his townhouse, but in empty offices, and an elevator, and in a broom closet in the plaza that housed Consumers Byline. In a supporting deposition from the New York State Police filed in the town of Clifton Park on July 10th, 1993, it stated, I state the following, that on April 27th, 1993, while residing at the St. Annie Institute, I reported that I had engaged in sexual intercourse with a man named Keith Raniere. This occurred when I was approximately 12 to 13 years old and occurred either at Keith's townhouse on 3 Flintock Lane, Clifton Park, New York, or his business located at Rome Plaza, Clifton Park, New York. Although these incidents did occur at the present time, I do not wish to formally entertain any criminal complaint against Keith Raniere.
Wow.
So, if anyone wants to doubt that the man not only abused grown-ass women with his disgusting behavior, he was also molesting children. And if you are to believe any of the people who were part of this NXIVM group, who kind of were defectors, he was telling them that children needed to have sex with adults. So it wasn't like this was some sort of secret, really, when it comes down to it.
It's like some Children of God shit.
It is definitely like that. What What is wrong with these men, dude? Ugh. And so we're going to get back to the timeline. In 2002, the family of NXIVM student Stephanie Franco hired Rick Allen Ross to deprogram their children, along with commissioning 2 doctors to analyze Raniere's methods of training. A year later, the experts' reports were published on the Cult Education Institute's website. The reports concluded that the Raniere's training seminars utilized coercive persuasion and thought reform techniques to gain undue influence over participants. These reports were the first to expose the inner workings of NXIVM and quickly had a lawsuit filed against them by Raniere and the corporate entity that would become NXIVM. As we will find, is Raniere's go-to method to get anybody that talks about him in a negative light. To Ross, these findings reflected the very same dynamics that many cults have used in the over 30 years that he has been researching them. And he believed that Raniere was so relentless in his pursuit to crush his perceived enemies that he was willing to go to prison in his attempt to do so. Why?
Because everything that I have highlighted here is exactly what you just said.
Well, then you read it.
No, just go. Just keep going. No, just keep going.
Raniere tried to sue Ross himself for 14 fucking years.
Jesus Christ.
I know. I mean, like, this guy is literally relentless when it comes to people that talk about him in a negative way. He thought it was a special honor designated only for him, but it turned out it was him along with about 15 other people who had eventually, quote unquote, crossed him. Enemies of Raniere's or ESP or NXIVM's, whatever you want to say, would be investigated by the organization. They would dig up any little dirt they could on you and attempt to use it against you in court in some way. Like if you had like an outstanding
warrant or ticket.
Your house wasn't, you did work on your home and you didn't get a
permit.
Like there's just little things. They would figure it out and they would just go at you on it for years and years and years. They would have their homes broken into. Artwork would be rearranged on the wall. Things would be taken from the house altogether, and others were obviously disturbed. Mail would be stolen. It would be opened and then returned. They would harass family members. They would harass friends. They would have services turned off, like electricity, like cable, and just generally disrupt their lives altogether. It was revealed to Toni Natalie that in the process of her torment for Raniere and his women, he had actually instructed them to poison her dog at one point because it always got in the way when they were attempting to run surveillance on her home, which finally, years later, explained the sudden death of her dog years earlier.
So this is where he crosses the line.
Yes, I know. I was like, this is where this motherfucker is going to get the death glare of many of you out there. Going and killing a dog. Taking it too far.
How and where MLMs expand depends on the professional and personal networks of the early adopters, and NXIVM grew organically and unexpectedly. One of the first few people of which he recruited were Sarah and Claire Bronfman, the heiresses to the Seagram fortune. The
gin?
Yes.
Yuck.
Well, Seagram's is, I think, a ginger ale. Seagram's ginger ale.
Oh, it's the bad ginger ale. It's not even the good one.
It's not even the good one.
Mm-hmm.
But they're billionaire heiresses nonetheless.
True.
Claire was, of the two sisters, the one who seemed like she was going to do something tangible with her life. She became a professional equestrian at 17, and at 20 was one of the best in England. However, Sarah had little to show for her life. She was divorced in less than a year after her marriage to Ronan Clark, who was a...
Rich guy?
No, sorry, who was a jockey.
Oh, okay.
And she had opened a skydiving business in Turks and Caicos.
Oh my God. That sounds like amazing dream. Yeah. Okay.
But it failed. So these circumstances considered proved to be the perfect segue of the cult into her life. And she attended a workshop in Mexico City where NXIVM was taking a strong hold.
I don't know if you noticed, but when I was looking on YouTube, looking for videos of just these little Dorcases talking to each other, that 90% of the videos were
in Spanish. I didn't notice that.
It's huge. Yeah. In Canada and in Mexico, it
blew up in both of those places, not here, weirdly.
Mm-hmm.
Claire, who had purpose and direction, initially resisted Sarah's recruitment into the group, but she became quickly convinced that he could help her in every facet of her life after she sought his help in upping her equestrian game.
Because he was so good at that.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Claire's interest in and devotion to Raniere quickly outpaced her sister's. She was younger, quieter, she was less fun, and she was homelier than Sarah. And she felt that NXIVM gave her an avenue to finally outshine her, and she fell head over heels in love with Raniere.
There's so many men out there, man. So many men.
Of course, he took note of the sibling rivalry and used it to his advantage and convinced them to invest in NXIVM for $2 million, repayable through personal training sessions and phone consultations with salesmen.
Oh, by all means, take my $2 million.
Yeah, no. Oh, you can pay me back? Yes, perfect.
Later. I owe you.
Yeah, I owe you. It's better than money.
Mm-hmm. In 2003, shortly after the Bronfman sisters joined the organization, Forbes magazine decided to do a feature on Keith Raniere with the angle of high-end executive coaching, and the Bronfman's involvement gave him an angle that would appeal to Forbes readers. The story made the cover, and there sat Keith looking off into the distance as if he was smelling a fart, with the caption, "The world's strangest executive coach, who literally says nothing when he talks for fucking an hour straight."
Babbles. Incoherent babble. So Vanity Fair. So this article left people at NXIVM completely stunned. They had expected a glowing article, but when Claire noticed how much more attention was being given to Sarah, she told her father about the $2 million they lent NXIVM, which caused her father, Edgar Bronfman, to remark to Forbes, "I think it's a cult."
I think.
He went on to say that he was troubled by the emotional and financial investment in NXIVM by his daughters, to whom he hadn't spoken to in months.
I wish that $2 million lost was just a slight concern to me. Yeah. I'm slightly concerned that they gave this guy $2 million. Concerning to me. Slightly troubled.
After the article came out and the catastrophe that ensued, Raniere blamed Claire. He told her that telling her father about their loan was a breach in ethics, ethics, and a violation of the 12-point mission statement. She apologized and begged for his forgiveness. So he used emotional blackmail to turn her into essentially his slave, and she would spend the next 15 years and more than $100 million.
$100 million!
Of her family's money trying to work her way back into his good graces.
That quote that Edgar Bronfman gave, "I think it's a cult," it seemed to haunt the cult. It was kind of like the initial nail in its coffin that would later just seal its fate. It seemed the writer, Friedman, agreed with him on that statement, as the article essentially exposed Raniere as a fraud. He said, "He speaks slowly and methodically with digression upon digression, using words he has defined for himself and then pausing to explain each term. You might think it's pure genius or maybe horse manure." And I'm definitely going to go with horse manure because I was trying to just make a coherent sentence out of everything that he was saying. And you can't because it's just nonsense.
It's so that interview that he does with Allison Mack. Did you watch that?
Yeah, I did.
What are you talking about? What is he talking about?
You just have to give somebody a platform to talk. I guess like we have one. And just let him talk for an hour and then somehow cry a couple times. She was so obviously she just needs some emotional stability in her life. So anyway, after the article was published, NXIVM began to invest heavily in PR. It apparently always went the same way. They would hire a political insider to make Raniere look good. He would then be compensated greatly by the Bronfman sisters, and then after a short while, the person would realize that Raniere was a petulant little bitch and engaged in many dubious activities, legally speaking. That person, the political insider, would then terminate the relationship, and then the insider would be added to the long list of Raniere's enemies and would be gone after ruthlessly. It was a cycle that repeated itself over and over. Later in 2003, Nancy Salzman brought an attorney, Joseph O'Hara, who at the time was completely unaware of the questionable ethics of Raniere, into the organization. Eventually, in early 2005, O'Hara realized that NXIVM was, for all intents and purposes, a cult. He filed a complaint stating that NXIVM ESP-related business entities are part of a complex and conspiratorial scheme, an agreement that involves a variety of tortious and or illegal activities, bank fraud, bribery, business fraud and theft, charities fraud, conspiracy, corruption and or attempted corruption of public officials, endangering the welfare of a child, filing false instruments, insurance fraud, violations of federal and state campaign finance statutes and regulations, immigration fraud, labor fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, perjury, structuring, tax evasion, tax fraud, theft of services, and last but not least, wire fraud. That's a lot of shit.
Whoa.
He said that even though they were designed, and this is an attorney, mind you, he said that even though they were designed to look like they all ran independently, all the facets were ultimately controlled by Raniere. Even though he has no acknowledged owning interest in no formal position of authority in any of the entities, he was, when it came down to it, in charge of all of them. And obviously because they all ran into the ground because he doesn't know how to run a business save his life like someone else we know that seems very similar to him.
Who?
Whose name shall not be mentioned. He recognized that NXIVM was a multi-level marketing company that operated as a Ponzi scheme, the exact kind of company that Raniere was barred from operating in the state of New York, and yet he was doing it. He also said that because Raniere and his followers were financially dependent upon the Bronfman sisters for their existence, they should both be held personally accountable and financially liable for all of the tortious and or illegal activities undertaken by anyone in the NXIVM organization. He found that NXIVM obtained information illegally, and things that would have only been obtainable by court order were in their possession, though they clearly had not gone through the proper routes. NXIVM told him the illegal activity would cease.
Okay.
Obviously it didn't, as he was sent a few weeks later what was clearly items that had been retrieved from the garbage of their perceived enemies. And when he called Kristen Keefe about it, she immediately rushed over to retrieve the box and told him, forget about it. Don't even worry about it. It's nothing. Just forget. They accidentally sent him stuff they wanted him to look into before they realized he was trying to go straight, I guess.
Go straight.
When he complained yet again to the higher-ups, Nancy began to threaten him by listing out all of the terrible things that might befall him if he happened to turn against the group. He would eventually leave, and after being hounded by NXIVM in one pointless legal battle after another, he eventually had to file bankruptcy. He suffered from an onslaught of health issues and eventually ended his legal career. So he did kind of get fucked by it, to be honest.
Oh, yeah.
But at least with all that, he was the one who spearheaded the lengthy process of convincing the federal government that NXIVM was a dangerous and criminal enterprise. The ESP walls were slowly beginning to crumble around Keith Raniere, who, although he was the self-professed smartest man in the world, only seemed to be able to create things that he completely ripped off from others. Like, we know some people like that too, if you want to be honest. And he'd read a book called IRS Humbug, which was basically a how to legally evade taxes for dummies.
Wow.
And so he did all that he could to do just that, which we will see later will eventually bite him in the ass.
Yay!
As it does. His corporate activities operated much like the government's secret projects, with many different umbrellas that know nothing about the other businesses. He wanted multiple parts to be able to continue to function if one part was shut down because they were operating illegally. He figured if he lived lavishly but allowed his underlings to, quote, control it all, legally speaking, that he would be able to avoid the taskman and his pesky laws.
Like L. Ron Hubbard, who understood the value of recruiting celebrities into his cult, Raniere set out to find some celebrities of his own. His weren't of the caliber of John Travolta, Tom Cruise, or Elizabeth Moss.
Beck, or all the other psycho Scientology. Sorry.
All of them.
Yeah.
But he did settle for Vancouver actresses in order to gain some sort of following of celebrity. We talked about her briefly in the beginning of the episode, but Kristen Kruk from Smallville became involved with NXIVM in 2005 at 23 years old. And in 2006, Nancy Salzman and Lauren Salzman went to Vancouver to recruit Allison Mack,
who would later become a bit of a nightmare within the organization.
Right. Allison Mack even tried to recruit Emma Watson into this other offshoot of NXIVM called Jeunesse. Jeunesse was a women's empowerment program aimed at women that promoted an old-fashioned approach to gender.
Oh my God.
For those who were interested, Jeunesse was a series of $5,000 8-day workshops, of which there were 11, that promoted a worldview that women and men are wired differently. Men were naturally polyamorous, while women were monogamous, and men didn't experience the same depth of experience, while women are less adept at understanding right and wrong. Holy shit. Nancy Salzman was, of course, the leader of this program as well, and it was encouraged for women in Jeunesse to have sex with men, and especially, obviously, with Keith. The men's group, the Society of Protectors, preached many of the tenets of the Red Pill or men's rights movement.
Oh, good.
That women were naturally submissive to men, that males should strive to be alpha at all times, especially in their marriages and romantic relationships.
Cool.
Well, we all know how oppressed men are.
Cool.
Yeah.
Milady. In 2007, NXIVM hired attorney Frank Parlato Jr., who had connected with the group through none other than our president's good old bud, pardoned Roger Stone, who, unlike O'Hara, gave two shits about doing the group's dirty work. He was ready to do it all. He would later tell Oxygen, the Oxygen network run by Oprah, that everyone seemed chipper about their lives, so what did he care if they were all in a cult or doing a bunch of dirty shit?
It's fine, as long as you're happy.
They look happy.
Yeah, it's fine.
They gave him an enemies list with a price that they were willing to pay him if he hit certain benchmarks. When Parlato refused the assignment, and over the course of the following year, realized that Raniere was a complete and total fraud.
Oh, wow, it took him a year, huh?
Yeah. Things began to go south with their relationship. He realized that despite the claims of Raniere that he was celibate, he slept with nearly every woman in the organization as long as they were attractive. That he had money squirreled away all over the place, and he manipulated the Bronfmans like they were his very own personal puppets, which they kind of were.
Yeah, for sure.
They would soon come after him, and in reading the documents, he would find that Claire Bronfman had perjured herself, most certainly at Raniere's behest. That's when it dawned on him that dishonesty and manipulation ran at the core of NXIVM, and he was ready to go to war. And it would be him that would eventually finish the job that Joseph O'Hara started in getting the federal government to realize they were a bit of a illegal situation.
Yay. In 2007, NXIVM participants donated the maximum allowable figure to Hillary Clinton's first presidential campaign, totaling about $30,000, and also gave $31,600 to the state Republican Senate campaign committee, and $34,763 worth of air transportation, for a total of $666,363 to the Republican Senate campaign committee.
Okay, so just doing both. What's the point?
Yep.
Okay.
Just in case.
Okay. Oh, just trying to get on the good side of everybody.
Just in case.
Okay.
In 2008, the Bronfman sisters allegedly pressured a confidant of their father to open criminal investigations into NXIVM's critics, and NXIVM reportedly kept dossiers on all of them in a box in the basement of Nancy Salzman's home. According to the Times-Union, NXIVM developed a reputation for aggressively pursuing critics and defectors who broke from its ranks, including using litigation to punish critics of Raniere, the organization, or its training methods. I know that Scientology does something like this. What's it called? I can't remember what it's called right now, but they do this same thing.
In 2009, the Bronfman sisters arranged for the Dalai Lama to visit Albany, and in turn, to be able to meet Keith Raniere.
Oh my god, he must have been just over the moon.
You know the Dalai Lama was thrilled as fuck to
Of
meet
course.
that oft-talked about Keith Raniere. The two men shook hands at Albany's Palace Theater, and Keith felt it was the pinnacle of his success, even though by that point there were already a number of defectors from the cult itself, and things were beginning to crumble ever so slightly. When the FBI raided Nancy Salzman's Clifton Park home, like you said, they found tons of documents on a number of influential politicians that ranged from Chuck Schumer to Elliot Spitzer, in addition to financial dossiers that were kept on prominent figures such as George Hearst, who owned the Times-Union and ran a bajillion stories about this cult and Keith Raniere. They even spied on their own legal team because Raniere's paranoia knew no bounds, but also so that they could use the information against these lawyers in case they ever grew a conscience and decided to turn against Raniere and the cult. In 2010, two major magazines published features on NXIVM, mainly focusing on the Bronfman sisters and reviving the cult moniker in the Vanity Fair investigative report by Susanna Andrews.
So former NXIVM coaches characterized students as prey for use by Raniere in satisfying his sexual or gambling-related proclivities. Kristen Keefe, who was a longtime partner of Raniere and mother of his child, left the group in 2014 and described Raniere as dangerous, stating that all the worst things you know about NXIVM are true.
So it took her quite a while to break free from him. Then in 2012, the Albany Times-Union yet again, who we've mentioned a bajillion times, wrote a story, and Raniere It wrote a story entitled In Raniere's Shadow, in which 3 different women came forward accusing him of statutory rape. One of the women we spoke about earlier, Gina Melita, was featured in the article. It was a bumpy road. Before any charges would be made against Raniere or NXIVM, they were able to bring charges on their detractors multiple times along the way.
In 2014, Raniere founded the NXIVM-affiliated news organization, The Knife of Aristotle, which was later known as The Knife and The Knife Media. The Knife of Aristotle was subsequently described as a fake news website and a cult. Weird. The organization also reportedly hired journalists in an attempt to gain support from the media and elicit new members to NXIVM, as well as fabricating staff members.
Oh my gosh.
In June of 2017, Frank Parlato revealed DOS on The Frank Report, sending shockwaves throughout the NXIVM community. Raniere denied any knowledge of DOS, stating that his most devoted concubine started it, but within NXIVM, it seemed very unlikely that he could be completely unaware of what exactly was going on.
Listen up, he was the master over all of them.
Yes.
And they said it. Get over it, dude.
NXIVM members defected one right after the other, and so did the DOS slaves once they realized they had all been lied to.
Because they all thought they were very special.
Nancy Salzman wasn't appalled, however, in the least that he had well over 100 slaves. She was pissed at her daughter, Lauren, for allowing the secret to come out, and for allowing DOS to happen in the first place. The whistleblower, who was Sarah Edmondson, was Lauren's slave and also her responsibility. Since there were so many moving pieces to this machine, billionaire heiresses and actresses, different news outlets became very interested in this whole NXIVM business. In order to save face for her master, Raniere, Allison Mack tried to take responsibility for the branding situation on all of the women. She said she wanted to do something more meaningful than a stupid tattoo that she had gotten when she was drunk, and do something that took guts.
Okay.
So we were talking about all of the Canadian actresses that were involved with the cult, but something we didn't talk about really was someone we didn't really talk about was Keith's favorite slave, Mariana, who had lived with him for years.
And he took Mariana and moved to Mexico because he kind of read the writing on the wall at this point. And he was like, I got to get out of here. I'm going to run to Mexico for my safety because I'm such a strong, brave man.
Of course. He called for DOS to be disbanded until things settled down, and fled with Mariana and their son to Punta Mita, Mexico, in October of 2017. In one last hurrah, in 2018, DOS members planned a recommitment ceremony in Mexico where all 5 remaining slaves from the 8 were going to attend, who were Loretta Garza, Daniela Padilla, Nikki Klein, Allison Mack, and Lauren Salzman. They would perform oral sex on him in tandem while kneeling naked before him. The ceremony never took place, and instead police raided the house with machine guns.
Oh, that sounds like a fun alternative.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, if it meant, like, I had to suck Keith Raniere's dick or get raided with machine guns, it would be a hard choice. It would be a hard choice.
I'd take a raid. Nikki, Allison, and Daniela had all been outside at the time and were detained immediately. Loretta was the person to open the door and was immediately taken away as well. The only person to remain in the house was Lauren, and she ran to the bedroom where Raniere was napping in order to protect him. Yeah. She asked him what she should do, and he told her to check to see if they had a warrant.
Oh, he is such a little bitch, dude.
He hid in the closet as she went down to deal with the federales, who put her down on the floor with 4 officers' machine guns pointed at her head. After a few minutes, she gave up because she was like, should I die for this guy? No. Ooh, no.
This little bitch hiding in the closet?
Yep.
No.
So she called his name, indicating to the police that he was in the house. He was arrested in Mexico and indicted for sex trafficking conspiracy, and conspiracy to commit forced labor, aka slavery. This indictment alleged that at least one woman was coerced into sex with Raniere, who forced DOS members to undergo the branding ritual Edmondson and others mentioned. Raniere was apprised of the charges in Fort Worth, and then
Shout out Fort Worth!
and then transported by bus to Brooklyn, where he was arraigned. He was denied bail 3 times, as he posed a substantial flight risk, and that if he were released, he may unlawfully exploit women or obstruct justice.
I think it's really funny that the judge is like, this guy's such a danger that if he gets out for just a few weeks, he's going to exploit women for sure.
Yeah.
Like, it's true, but still.
Nancy Salzman's home was raided shortly after Raniere's arrest, and prosecutors stated during his arraignment that further arrests and a superseding indictment for Raniere and Mack should be expected. In late May, authorities moved to seize 2 NXIVM-owned properties near Albany. In prison, other inmates tortured him, wiping shit on his mattress and stuffing shit in his shoes, as men in prison tend to do to other prisoners who abuse women, and especially underage girls, as they are children.
Eat shit.
Allison Mack, Nancy Salzman, Lauren Salzman, and Kathy Russell were all arrested and charged in the weeks that followed. Claire Bronfman's attorney at the time released a statement stating that she had done nothing wrong and that charges against Claire are the result of government overreaching and charging an individual with crimes just because the government disagrees with some beliefs taught by NXIVM and held by Claire.
You funded a cult.
Yeah, exactly.
So the complaint and affidavit in support of the arrest of Keith Raniere stated, NXIVM maintains a feature of a multi-level marketing scheme commonly known as a pyramid scheme in which members are recruited via a promise of payments or services for enrolling others into the scheme. The investigation found that even back in the 90s, Raniere had a coven of women who he was having sex with, whom couldn't go have sex with anyone else as they were forbidden to do so. Raniere was denied bail as the judge thought he posed a The 5 other defendants in the case were all arrested, like you said, in the weeks to follow. They all looked gaunt with pallid skin because, like we've talked about, Raniere wants them to be very skinny, and I'm pretty sure they were all just unhealthy as fuck.
Oh, for sure.
There was Nancy Salzman, who was known by the NXIVM followers as Prefect, and was Raniere's first acolyte and decades-long business partner, and NXIVM's president. There was her daughter, Lauren. As we've talked about multiple times, she was still in college when she first met Raniere and had a promising future ahead of her until he got his hooks in her, stringing her along for years, promising her a chosen one baby, and turning her and her mother against each other to the point where her mom just essentially
She abandoned her.
Yeah, abandoned her. There's Kathy Russell, who was the bookkeeper, and she looked terrible, apparently, in court. She was rail thin, she had hollow eyes, she looked exhausted. I feel that exact way, minus the rail thin part. Claire Bronfman, the liquor heiress with the impossible to say name. Like we talked about, Raniere bamboozled her and her sister out of hundreds of millions of over $100 million of dollars. I can't talk it. I can't say it.
I can't talk it.
Raniere bamboozled her sister and her out of about $100 million, give or take. It was a little bit more than that, and exploited them and their connections. Every single thing that NXIVM did was financed by them. They financed all the legal harassment every single quote-unquote enemy of NXIVM was subjected to, and the 6 attorneys who represented them in the federal case. No matter how much money No matter how much money Raniere and NXIVM lost of theirs, Claire Bronfman refused to accept or acknowledge any wrongdoing by him. She is a true ride or die.
No kidding.
And a billionaire to boot. It's the perfect catch for a con man cult leader like Raniere. She never failed to proclaim his innocence anytime she did so for herself until she finally flipped. Allison Mack, again, we've talked about her a million times, the Smallville actress. She was Raniere's alpha slave, allegedly procuring the women for Raniere at the end, which is apparently a job title out there for sociable ladies with rotting cesspools for hearts. Supposedly her idea to brand the women, like we said. And then there was Kristen Keefe, who had been Raniere's legal go-to guy, and recruiter. She was not charged. It was likely because she had cooperated with authorities early on from the moment that she left the group. Their defense was this. They were a group of consenting adults. There was video of them asking to be branded. BDSM wasn't unlawful, and DOS itself was completely separate from NXIVM.
Oh,
so you couldn't punish the whole company for the actions of an unrelated party. They were kink shaming. They were attacking freedom. But as we've heard throughout this entire episode, it wasn't only the DOS issue that was a problem. There was multiple issues that were illegal, that they were conducting business in illegal ways, and the government finally caught on to it. In June of 2018, about 2 years ago, NXIVM suspended all operations, and websites defunct. Pretty much everything having to do with the cult and the people in it is just blank.
Down.
Mm-hmm.
In 2019, one by one, the co-defendants turned on Raniere. Nancy Salzman was the first. She said, quote, I am pleading guilty because I am in fact guilty. It has taken me some time and some soul searching to come to this place. When I began working with NXIVM, I believed that we would be helping people. I still believe that some of what we did was good. The problem began when I compromised my principles and did things which I knew or should have known were wrong. I justified them to myself by saying that what we were doing was for the greater good. Now, having had time to step back from the community I was immersed in for nearly 20 years, I accept that some of the things I did were not just wrong but criminal. By my plea of guilty, I hope to at least begin atoning for my actions and start the next chapter of my life.
I'm pretty sure she was just trying to save her ass.
Of course she was. Mm-hmm. She went on to describe NXIVM as an enterprise comprised of people close to Keith Raniere that engaged in racketeering activity. Lauren Salzman, her daughter, was next, a few days later, and would be one of the star witnesses. She said that her perception of Raniere had changed on the day he was arrested.
Why, though? But why?
Because the way he cowered when the federales came in, it put them all at risk.
You mean that wasn't a strong, manly thing to do?
No.
Not to, assign gender roles or anything, but,
She said everything he taught us was this: society of protectors. This is what men are. This is what men do. This is what is noble. This is what women don't do. This is what women can't do. And then he didn't do it and I did it. I couldn't make sense of how that could even be in any universe where he was who I believed he was.
Sorry, but also all the other heinous shit didn't make you realize he was a piece of garbage until he hid in a closet and you were the one that was put at risk.
Exactly. Until it directly affects you. Yeah. It doesn't matter. Weird. Allison Mack was third. She confessed to supporting a criminal enterprise, engaging in criminal conduct, and laid out her overseeing of DOS and her collection of collateral. She said, I am prepared to take responsibility for acts in which I was involved, some of which I now recognize were wrong. I joined NXIVM to find purpose. I was lost and wanted to find a place, a community in which I would feel comfortable. Over time, I truly believed I had found a group of individuals who believed as I did and who were interested in trying to become better people, and in doing so, make those around them better. Through it all, I believed Keith Raniere's intentions were to help people and that my adherence to his system of beliefs would help empower others, and I was wrong.
She really shitted it up.
Yeah.
She really shitted it up herself. But I will say that just seeing her talking to him in that interview that they have on YouTube, it's like he says something, he's speaking nonsense, and she starts crying. He's talking about like
authenticity.
She's asking about creativity and how is it the same as authenticity, and he's talking absolute babble, and she's like, I don't know why, but this is just making me cry right now.
And I'm like, bitch, neither do I.
Yeah, but it's like, it's clear that she needed some sort of something.
She needed something to latch on to.
And she found it in him for a while. And he obviously used that weakness in her. That was the point, find people that had damage and use it against them. But man, oh man, did he really he let her loose, and she fucking ran with it in a way that I would say I would hope I would not do myself. So then next up came Kathy Russell. On April 19th, she confessed to violating immigration laws by presenting false documents to the U.S. consulate in Mexico. It was an order for that girl that we spoke about a minute ago, but it was an order for her to be able to come to America and stay there. It was all illegal. I mean, they kidnapped her from Mexico and brought her illegally and then kept her illegally. It was just scary that luckily they didn't kill her. At least there's that.
Finally was Claire Bronfman's confession with the most lame admission of guilt I've ever come across. She said, Your Honor, I was afforded a great gift by my grandfather and my father. With the gift comes immense privilege and, more importantly, tremendous responsibility. It does not come with the ability to break the law. Although I'm confident that she really thinks it does, and in most cases, being that god-awfully rich, does.
And she did. And she lived it,
Yeah.
until it came and bit her in the ass.
Right.
And she continued on in a very empty sounding apology, claiming to have learned a hard lesson that I didn't want to hear anymore. So I didn't, I erased it. And in the trial, there was a company called Extreme Restraints that listed off all the bondage toys that were purchased by the group for their sex dungeon. And I mean, it was pretty intense. Like, they definitely got physical. I think we talked about it a little bit, how they were like beaten if they did something wrong. Mm-hmm. They were restrained in ways that I'm sure they weren't real thrilled by, considering it was with Keith Raniere, who was essentially forcing them to do it, and not just like two happy sex partners, or however many happy consensual sex partners choosing to participate in BDSM. It was just more of a punishment kind of situation, which is not healthy. The prosecution, like we talked about very briefly, was more than happy to mention quite often about Raniere's erectile dysfunction problems. And I'm going to mention it too because haha.
Because haha.
You little rapist. So in the end, he was found guilty on 2 counts of racketeering, 1 forced labor conspiracy, 1 wire fraud conspiracy, 1 sex trafficking conspiracy, 1 count of sex trafficking of a girl named Nicole, an attempted sex trafficking of a girl named Jay, and he has yet to be sentenced due to coronavirus. He was supposed to be sentenced at the beginning of the year, and it kind of hasn't happened yet. So I'm sure he's going to get, all that's coming to him. He has 6 charges. What is it? Like 6 to 8 charges. I'm not counting them up, but
6.
Yeah.
Yeah, but get fucked, Keith Raniere.
Yeah, you're a piece of shit, just like every other dumbass little incel. Like, he would be an incel if not for this one magical power. I don't know what it is. Like, I guess Toni was like, he was really good in bed. He was very confident. Yeah. I'm like, okay. There you go then. I guess that's the justification for all of it. But yeah, so NXIVM was a shitty organization. For anyone that, isn't a Keith Raniere sycophant. Get fucked, Keith Raniere. We hate you. That's the end of it. Are you all right?
Yeah. You made me laugh while I was taking a drink of my water.
Bianca's hate for Keith Raniere is so strong that she's now choking on
my hate and bile.
On hatred. But thanks for listening, everybody. We hope you enjoyed this episode on NXIVM and their exploits. We'll update you whenever Keith gets his sentence, but as far as it stands, I don't believe he has.
Follow us on Spotify. Please be sure to leave us a 5-star written review on iTunes. Come check us out at patreon.com/creepitreal. We have exclusive content for you.
We love you. Have a great life.
Have a great everything.
Creep it real.